This is a lecture on Kathleen Jamie's Mr. and Mrs. Scotland Are Dead. The objectives are the poem. I've typed it out, but it's also available to you through a link on Moodle, as well as it's available to you again through a link on Moodle with Kathleen Jamie actually reading it, which of course I suggest you do. I want to look at sentence and punctuation and consider how it's working and how Kathleen Jamie uses both of these things, and of course, content consideration. So here's the poem. It consists of 3 stanzas, and it is, of course, called Mr. and Mrs. Scotland Are Dead. So I've used red to indicate independent clauses or complete thoughts or a sentence, and orange to indicate dependent clauses, incomplete thoughts. I have placed all punctuation in white. So I'm hoping that this can kind of help as we move through it. I think it's important to understand at least the basics of grammar so that if you decide to break a grammatical rule, you know why you're breaking it and not just it's not broken because you didn't know better, it's you're actually using a fragment on purpose. You want that sentence fragment there for a specific reason. So you'll notice she opens with a prepositional dependent clause with that on the civic amenity landfill site. And then she has this phrase in surrounded by commas. Sorry, I'm trying to locate my pointer while I'm talking, and clearly I cannot do 2 things at once. My apologies. So I'm talking about this here, and it's separated because it's surrounded by these commas, and it's she's saying the coup, like she's found something amazing that that she's, you know, how do I explain the coup? Like, and not that she's taken over a government, which is kind of, I think, the way we're used to seeing that word used, but rather that she's like, I'm going to use an Oprah phrase because it's all I have in my brain right now, the wow factor of look what I found. The dump beyond the cemetery and the 30-mile-an-hour sign, her stiff old lady's bags, open-mouthed spew postcards sent from small Scots towns in 1960. So this first part is a complete sentence because, of course, it's in the red. She's using a colon, and I'm right here. She uses this colon to separate the independent clause from a list she's making. So that is not grammatically correct, but it's quite common. So I think a lot of people think that is actually how we use a colon. It's not grammatically, technically correct, but it does the work that she wants in that it separates that what comes previous to this list. And then she has a period, which of course, and I'm right over here, this period stops. It is a full stop. It actually makes you stop. Mr. and Mrs. Scotland, here is the hand you were dealt. And again, she's using this colon to separate a list. And her list includes a few independent clauses along with dependent clauses. And she's also using semicolons. And semicolons should behave like a period and separate two independent clauses that are closely linked in thought. She's not doing that, but what it does do is it makes you pause more than a mere comma would. And it also helps to separate what's, that Jean asks kindly, the lovely scenery and careful schoolroom script, the Beltane Queen was crowned today. So it's just helping kind of like separate this list. She ends with a clear sentence fragment, but Mr. and Mrs. Scotland are dead, which really pulls your attention just because it is short. It's the shortest sentence in that stanza, and so it really draws your attention to it. Here, I find it really interesting. She has just this series of dependent clauses that you link automatically to this, couldn't he have burned them? So we're linking all of this to this idea, but they're not grammatically technically linked. Again, she has this interesting use of colons. I find this very curious where she uses a question mark and a semicolon. So there is a question being asked, but she wants a question and a further pause. And again, this is about just lists, I think, that she's listing these things that we're locating, that we're finding, that we're coming across as we move through this dump. And this overriding kind of thought like, couldn't have these things been burned? And here released in a gray curl of smoke. Not only this pattern for a cable knit, but also, or this, tossed between a toppled fridge and sweet, stinking anorak. She's finding their dictionary for mothers. M, milk, the woman who worries. And here, Mr. Scotland's John Bull puncture repair kit. And we're seeing, of course, apostrophe to indicate not only contractions like here, but also, of course, possession. And again, here, the possession. So there's just like she uses punctuation to really guide us through this poem. She's telling us when to breathe and when to like pause, and indicates like get ready. Here's a list, oh, and here's another list, and then this wonderful, where she's obviously seeing the joiner's tools, because this is we know because she's discussed this prior to the poem's publication, but also in interviews that these are items that she actually found in a garbage dump in outside of Edinburgh, and that these joiner's tools were stamped with all caps, Scotland, Scotland. And so there's she's recreating that stamp that she's seeing on the handles here, with these all capitals. And here we're in the final stanza, we see more independent clauses and far less dependent clauses. We're still seeing kind of like list type things here, but not as much as previously. And a lot of question marks in this last stanza. And of course, the colon to indicate a list. So I hope that this kind of like helps you see how fragments, independent clauses, and dependent clauses, and lists and punctuation can work in quite a complicated way. So that if you have a lot of things that you're describing, there's a way of doing that that isn't that doesn't become vague and general, that doesn't lose the reader. And this is a really good example of a lot of things that we're seeing, a lot of images that we're receiving from the writer, and we don't get lost in those. And also really notice that present tense. Do we take them before the bulldozer comes to make more room, to shove aside his shaving brush, her butt and tin? So, on top of all this really interesting, complex work with sentence structure and punctuation, there is all those other things that I think we so often take for granted: repetition of sound, rhyme, rhythm, and also like just the way she builds nostalgia. And beginning with ephemera is just paper, like a postcard, a concert ticket. Ephemera is pieces of paper that we find precious or treasure, but in and of themselves have no monetary value or no sentimental value to anyone but the owner. So she builds from ephemera into like items that are even necessary, like, tools and a shaving kit and, you know, things that we actually use in our daily, day-to-day lives. And notice how in here we move from do we save this toolbox alongside these old-fashioned views. So she has next to something very concrete, very necessary within life, followed by an abstraction, old-fashioned views, addressed, after all, to Mr. and Mrs. Scotland. Should we reach and take them? So she's using that repetition that we see at the beginning of this stanza. And then, and she's saying, so if she gathers up all of these items from this dead couple, what happens then? Take them home, forget them till that person enters our silent house, begins to open to the light our kitchen drawers, and performs for us this perfunctory rite, the sweeping up, the turning out. So, this idea that they will inevitably end up again, even if they're taken home with the speaker of the poem, they will, when she and her husband die, they will once again end up in landfill or in recycling or wherever. So it's a really a nostalgic poem that works on a variety of levels, as well as reminding the reader in kind of an uncomfortable way how one day someone will perform for us this rite of emptying our house. I think it really makes us think of our own ephemera, our own idea of what we find treasure or precious, and those items that we use every day, and where will they end up one day? These letters that we have hung on to, these postcards that we have hung on to, or even if they're digital, those digital photographs, those digital letters, and or maybe you guys still have like handheld letters and handheld photographs to actually think of. I think ephemera is quite different today than it was for example, for Mr. and Mrs. Scotland. So I've I think already talked about the content, but here it is written out for you. So that is the conclusion of Kathleen Jamie's Mr. and Mrs. Scotland Are Dead. Quite an evocative, really beautiful poem that resonates a lot with you as you read it. And again, really think like she doesn't have flowery phrases. She doesn't have a lot of like sentimental language here. She's relying on really concrete nouns and present tense active verbs, and really, really relies on punctuation to help us move through this poem. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I really enjoy it. And there's so much to learn from this piece. Thank you very much.